We got over the border, everything was good. As we were driving through, a lot of buildings were bombed up, and we kind of just carried on, and we saw all sorts of things there that I didn't expect to see. I was actually ill, and I had a lot of back problems at the time. I thought if I come and stay with Mum for a while, that I'll try to get better.
Here we are again, standing by the swimming pool. There we are, mother and daughter together. Standing on the lawn, look as if they're ready to take their photograph.
The last time I went through, everything was still like Rhodesia, like I remember, but now it wasn't. But it's very different to any other country that I've been to. The beauty's different. The flamboyant trees, everything is in bloom. It just looked very beautiful, but you had all these rooms in between it. The whole setup just looked as though it had gone back like maybe 20 years. It was just so bad. Anyway, we got to Mum. We started enjoying ourselves, playing the pool. Anyway, Stephen wanted to go out one night and go meet up with all his friends, like Stephen always does. Anyway, he hadn't come home, and the children and I had all gone to bed and tucked up. And I had this bang, bang, bang. I didn't know what it was. And then I kind of looked up, and you had the military with their guns and everything looking at you, saying, open up, open up, open up.
The first time we realised something was wrong was when 2 trucks arrived, 9 policemen, all with their AKs, and Stephen in handcuffs. No identification, no warrant of arrest or anything like that. They just came in and turned us completely upside down. They said emergency regulations, as though that gave them the right to be able to just come in and do what they like, and make no mistake, that's exactly what they did. And they obviously circled the little cottage with Eileen in bashing on the windows and all that kind of stuff.
So I unlocked the door, and they just pushed their way through, basically sticking a gun in your kind of face. And the children started crying. They demanded all our passports, so I had to get all the passports out, and they'd taken it. In the meantime, there was another group in Mum's section in the bedroom doing the same thing, and of course Dad got dressed and they stood there and watched him. No respect for anybody. But these weapons were in your face. When I say in your face, they're in your face. When Mum came over, Mum was in tears, and Stephen was actually tied up with his hands and his feet.
And Stephen had to take them and give his passport and give his car documents and all that sort of thing.
And they were accusing him of a South African spy. And they said that his car, he had a remote control that was the bomb. They were going to let a bomb off in Salisbury. Because it was a fancy car, it had different vices on it that you wouldn't get unless you pay a lot of money for it. And these guys don't know nothing. Because if you think of their vehicles running sideways, the old Bedford truck, completely finished. It used to be our military vehicles, but everything they've got was derelict. And the way they looked, it wasn't like smart uniforms or anything. It was just like, put it on, and literally they looked like terrorists running around. My fear was that they're going to shoot us. That's what my fear was. And then they said Dad had aerials, and then they said, well, that's to do with the spine, saying that that is also transmitting over to South Africa.
And then when they left with Stephen, Dad followed them to the police station, but when he got there, they went through a different gate. And then Dad went through the normal gates, and he waited and waited and waited. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, he decided that he'd be better come back because they weren't taking any notice of him at all. We were all very, very upset. We couldn't understand where they'd got their sort of charges from. They said if you come at 7 in the morning, you can take him home. So at 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take him home. 7 in the morning, we were there to take h when we turned up. That was not the case. And we wanted to find out from Steve now what all the trouble was. Stephen didn't know. And anyway, we had the room filled with these Africans, and they were shouting at me, and they said, "We want to hear what you say," and all this kind of thing. And of course, by that time, it really shook us up immensely. We were both very, very frightened. And then when we left, because we couldn't speak to Steve, we went immediately to the British consulate in Harare. And we had to wait for them to open, and I think they opened at 9. And the moment we got in and were able to speak to the British consulate, they immediately looked up their records to see if Stephen was eligible for protection. And the answer was yes. The British government took over the controls and phoned the department that was holding Stephen. They asked him, "Well, what are you holding them for?" And they couldn't give him an answer. And then he said, "Well, unless Stephen was released by 4 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to class it as an international incident." So we went back again about 12 to give Stephen some food, but we weren't allowed to see him at all. They were still interrogating him. They had interrogated him from the very moment they picked him up. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Stephen was coming home at about 5 o'clock from the party or from his friends, and they stopped him on Jemson Avenue. It was a white vehicle driving behind Stephen, and Stephen had a beautiful red Crusader. And they moved in front of him, stopped him, flashed their cards and said, "You're under arrest." So then they moved into Stephen's car, all their beer bottles and that they were drinking, they were drunk at the time, and they carted Stephen off to the cells. Stephen said all the muck from the loos were all over the place, and he was forced to walk barefoot. They didn't give him anything to drink, and Stephen said that they continued to interrogate him more or less day and night. He said the only thing that happened was that the one would go off and a new one would come in to continue the interrogation. And they harped and accused him of being a South African spy, which he was never. One of the rooms that he went into, the chap sitting behind the desk had a special sort of paper in front of him saying that it was a top secret. They also gave him his South African Defence Force number, which he didn't have. I mean, it was just a stack of trumped up lies. When Stephen said to him, "No, that isn't the case. I've never been in the South African Defence Force. You've got the wrong person." And that was the occasion that they brought in 4 different people to vouch that Stephen is the one that was in the South African Defence Force. With like a cutout from a cardboard that they stood behind, but they could see Stephen, and they said, "Yes, that's him." We knew from that moment that we were helpless. We were really helpless. What can you do? The consulate himself went down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and said, "We want to know now exactly what you want to do with Steve." So when they released Stephen at the police station, the British consulate was there to make sure that everything was handed back. But Stephen himself said if it was not the British consulate had gone down in person, they would never have released him. And then when they handed Stephen his passport back, they said to Stephen, "Well, you're jolly lucky that you've got a British passport, because we were going to incinerate you, you bastard." And that's how Stephen left the police station. And when he arrived home, it was a quick shower, quick cup of tea, something to eat, because he'd had nothing during the whole period.
He says, get in the car, we're going now." And it was going into dark. And I said to Stephen, "Well, we've got nowhere to go, we're going to be travelling all night." He says, "I don't care, I'm not staying here." Anyway, along the road, we found a hotel more or less halfway to Bight Bridge. And anyway, we had, I think it was too late to have dinner. And in the morning we had our breakfast, and it wasn't a nice hotel, it was just a rubbish little thing on the side of the road. Anyway, we all had something to eat, and then we got into the vehicle and we started driving towards Spike Bridge. As we were driving, we saw military with machine gun belts. Literally, they had one this way and one those they were Mexicans. But that's what they're carrying around. And then the vehicles, they were in convoy going somewhere. In the meantime, we just carried on going, and then all of a sudden we started seeing dead bodies on the side of the road. So they obviously had done their dirty deed and started moving on and just left the bodies on the side of the road. And of course my kids were like horrified. It's not something you go and see. And we kept on going and going, and there was a lot of dead bodies on the side of the road wherever we were going. So I don't know what those guys were doing, but we just carried on. Stephen wouldn't stop. He said he just wanted to get across and get into South Africa as soon as possible. We got to the border, and the border is not like you know it. It's hot, boiling, and you got kids, no air conditioning, trying to get your passports stamped and to get to the other side as soon as we can. So we acted very kind of nothing was wrong, just so we could get our passports stamped and get out of the country. And as we got over the country, Stephen, then we stopped and just kind of had a breath. Stephen was kind of relieved. At the time he said he doesn't ever want to go back, and I said, well, that was the last time I ever go back. We saw Johannesburg in the distance, and both of us were relieved. But remember, Stephen, after going through that, still, he wasn't himself like he was when we left. Not happy-go-lucky, because that's what he was. Very cautious, sees anybody, is like, oh, is that something going on? He wasn't at peace with himself after that. But when we got back to his apartment in South Africa, in Johannesburg, it was like a relief for both of us, really. And the children still, they would never understand. But it wasn't a nice experience, that. It was the worst experience I think I experienced. Where you are helpless, you can't do anything, you got young children, and they can do what they like, and there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing is to do is keep calm. So we couldn't protect ourselves. The only person that we could turn to is the British Embassy. And if they didn't protect us, we probably would never be here today. Anybody being put in that situation, I think, would be really horrified. I know when Stephen got back, a newspaper did an article on him about his incident in the jails in Zimbabwe and what happened. So it's all been put down in the newspapers as well, because that was a horrible experience for Stephen. But it did affect him, and it did affect my children. As time went through, Stephen also used to make a joke of it. In his own way, you know what Stephen's like. He has his own way of making a joke and imitating their voices, and we used to sit around at tea time and just go through our stories, because the Rhodesians have got a lot of stories to tell. But he's my brother and I loved him, and at least he was safe. That was the main thing.